Ingram Smith, Bud Elliott back again for another episode of the Nolecast. Bud, it's the wide receivers this time. It's the
Good
wide
to see you
receivers for
again, man.
real. We if you listened to our last episode, we gave you a nice little pump fake. That we were going to do wide receivers. I'm just going to chalk that up. I had a great event or a great time at the Tampa Noel event, Bud. I don't even know if I've had a chance to tell you this, but the weather in Atlanta was horrible. They closed the airport. I ended up sitting on the runway for 5.5 hours in Tampa while we were waiting to take off, and I have certainly acquired something from one of my fellow passengers there. So, fighting through a little bit of a head cold. So, if I start talking to you about E.G. Green or something like that being available on this year's wide receiver preview, I'll just
Vanover.
let you take over. Yeah, exactly.
I,
So,
I know nothing about flight problems in the last month at all. It's I do have a
it's
very
something
funny Atlanta
special
story
when
to
they're
tell
just
you.
like, you're just going to sit here. You're just going to sit here for quite a while. But
Yeah.
this has never been a podcast where we complain or talk about stuff that goes on in our lives all that much. And we'll jump right into it. Hey, look, we're excited to do all these positional previews, and we're fortunate to have the sponsors that we have. We want to thank Matt Lewis and his team at Congruity HR. .com is the website. They can help you with onboarding. They can help you with termination. They can help you with HR. They can help you with payroll. They are fantastic assets to your business. I can tell you that firsthand, and would be happy to connect Matt and his team with you if you guys had an interest. What I was going to say there before we did our sponsor mention is that we've been excited to do all these positional previews. This is the one that we've kind of found a way to talk about in all of the positional previews leading up to this one. So, look, there's two guys in particular. There's one new guy that is all the rage, and it'll be exciting to jump right in here and talk about Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, Kentron Portier, and a list of other talented wide receivers that Florida State has.
I am extremely excited to talk about this group. I mean, like this is easily a top 10 receiver group in the country. And if you were to put the parameters on only the top two, I think you can legitimately argue that this is if you could just pick two, I think you can very fairly, like no garnet and gold glasses on, argue this is a top five, like maybe a top 3 or 4 receiver group in the country. Like one is fairly obvious. Okay.
Yes,
Like
one is fairly obvious.
what one school
Don't
in Columbus
don't
has
let
two.
anybody tell you that you have better wide receivers than Ohio State. Just walk out of that conversation. But other than that, hey, entertain it. You can, and again, if you're talking about the absolute top of the food chain, then yeah, this is a dynamic duo, and there's some pretty exciting pieces behind it.
So Bruce Feldman does the freaks list, and I want to stick with Johnny because Johnny did show some things last year that he did not show at Arizona State and had legitimate improvement. So let's go to Johnny first, and then we'll talk Keon. Johnny is a really unique player. Feldman today on the Athletic, he does this freaks list every year. Now, Johnny Wilson, 6'7", 239 pounds, 36-inch arm, 10.25 hand, standing reach of 8'10", 35.5 vert, according to Feldman, with a 10.5 broad. And I assume he got this from FSU because I know they're big into the GPS stuff. 21.23 max mile an hour in a game with an acceleration of 5.26 meters per second and a max decel of negative 7.21 m/s, which I'm assuming is meters per second, but I probably wait a second. There's no way you can decel 7.21 meters per second. So I'm actually not sure what the m/s is there, but that seems good if it made the article. Great. I will say I did some work on a story for SB Nation that I never published because I left SB Nation shortly thereafter because they stopped caring about sports. But I went to a special lab out in Cali when I was out there for Elite 11, like the last one I did for SBN. And they were doing like some of that cool deceleration stuff with force plates. And basically, Do you know that James Harden is a guy who does not rate particularly high? The NBA star. Bud Talks NBA is a popular segment on Cover 3. I know a lot about the NBA. I can name several NBA players.
It's one of the first things I think about when I think about Elliott.
So James Harden is like not particularly a standout athlete in many of the traditional categories that you would see an NBA star have great, great attributes with. But his deceleration relative to his size is actually like off the charts elite. And so it's sort of the whole Top Gun thing. I'm gonna hit the brakes, it's gonna fly right by type deal. That's a pretty good decel number for Johnny, and I can see some similarities there. He also improved his drop rate quite a bit. At Arizona State, it was like unplayably bad. Now, last year, it was still bad for sure. I mean, he had 80 targets, 43 catches on the year. 43 catches for 897 yards, by the way, is stupid good. Like that's yards per catch wise is huge. But when we talk Keon, I'll show you the difference here, right? Like the difference between making, sort of mid-second money and making first-round money is this. Drop rate was still 8% according to the one metric. I think it was 12 according to the other site. So like more than double what your traditional elite receivers are. And yet he's still extremely good on a yards per target basis, like a big play machine, kind of like a Giancarlo Stanton, right? You're going to live with some of the strikeouts because he's going to hit some balls 500 feet. And if you just keep giving the guy at bats, it's probably going to work out. Occasionally you run bad where you have 3 strikeouts or a 4 strikeout game like NC State. If Johnny catches a couple of those balls, you probably win 11 games last year, not 10. But still a much better player to have on the roster than not. They got his hands to a playable level, right? And I think that's like an area, if he improves the hands even more, I don't think he's ever going to be like a 2% or a 3% guy, but if he can get that down from 8 to like, I don't know, 4.5, 5 even, dude, that's a huge deal. And that's a really unique special weapon that's going to keep defensive coordinators up at night for this football team.
I saw 3 days of practice. I don't want to make too much of that. Okay. Small sample set. I was impressed by the way Johnny caught the ball. Again, this is not massive. I'm not going to tell you, oh, things have changed, 180-degree turnaround. But Johnny made 2 back shoulder catches. Well, I mean, look, the problem, and this is common with wide receivers. It's not the hard catches aren't necessarily the problem. It's the one where he knows it's coming and has time to think about it. But Johnny made some wildly nice catches.
Well, that's the
and
point.
Dude, Johnny is bigger. When you see him, Johnny's put on, I don't know what the roster says, as somebody that was at the bowl game in Orlando, saw Johnny a lot, and saw Johnny at practice. Johnny's put on 12 to 15 pounds, in my opinion. Has put on some muscle in his top half, his back in particular. That is impressive. So
very very good blocker, when like a devastating blocker when he gets his hands on a guy too. To your point about like it wasn't always the hard ones that he failed to bring in, he only caught 73% of passes that were graded as on target. Now, if he happens to be your number 2, that's freaky. And I think there is a real chance that he is, I'm not going to necessarily call him the 2, but he could be a 1B to a 1A here in Keon Coleman, who everybody on the team now agrees that he is the best basketball player on the team because, as you noted, he was like in the top 8 on Michigan State's basketball team. Pretty poor quarterback play last year for Michigan State. 92 targets, 58 catches. So Johnny caught 73% of balls that were graded as on target. Keon Coleman, 88%.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
When Michigan State put it on him, he came down with it. The contested catch rate, like his ability to come down with balls when a guy's draped all over him still, off the chart. Guy's freaky athletic. And I really think if I asked you who's the highest drafted player on this team, you might say Verse. You're not going to name a whole lot of guys, I think, before you get to Keon Coleman, right? Assuming he runs well. at the combine.
If we acknowledge Verse, I think I don't think there's another name out there.
Yeah.
Maybe something wild happens to the defensive line. That's the only other place where somebody could come out of nowhere, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think Josh Farmer is going to be a top 40 pick this year, but Josh Farmer has the ability to flash. That wouldn't, if you're looking for an outlier, I'd look at the defensive line. I can't say Keon Coleman's just an NFL player at practice. I mean, he's 6'4", really impressive with what he does. And again, I'm not here to, sing Kumbaya, but for a guy who's coming in is a crazy talented athlete and is here for 4 months with the idea of playing on Sundays, dude's a pretty damn good teammate. I mean, it is, and which is something that we had heard before he came in. It's pretty remarkable to see it play out in front of you in practice. I mean, he's not. Look, I'm sure wide receivers are always going to be wide receivers to some extent, but you got some impressive culture there, and it's all the more impressive when you've got a guy that's relatively new to campus who is fully bought into it and is only adding to it, and that's what really surprised me by Keon. Look, I knew top 8 player at Michigan State. Look at some of the highlights. You're talking about a dynamic, top tier athlete. Pretty remarkable to see the way he goes about practice, and he said this publicly, and he's also said some things privately to us about his film study that are make you be like, okay, yeah, you may have like, the spider graph that you see in soccer all the time. Like, dude, you may have points that get pretty wide on almost everything here, and that's how you have a kid who could potentially be a top 35 pick or something like that.
They're challenging him too, for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, like they're not.
Would you let him return punts? This is just kind of all out of our normal flow of questions, but just two fans sitting here talking.
Yeah, I would. I think.
Yeah.
Just because I feel like if you're going to win games 11, 12, 13, and Lord willing 14, 15, I think you need your top half of the draft players. And we've discussed, and I think we've been pretty open, like there's a lot of professional players on this team. The majority of them will be sort of more back half of the draft just due to ceiling ability. I think if you're going to win games 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, you need your top half of the draft guys to be really special in multiple phases. So, yeah, I think I would. If you're going for it, go for it.
Yeah, good. Well said.
Do you know who else is really excited about Keon Coleman, I bet? I bet you Jordan Travis is like, dude, are you kidding me? This guy catches 88% of balls that I put on target. Like
Jordan, between the two guys we've talked to and the guy we're about to talk about, if it's 50-50, Jordan doesn't need to eat the ball. I mean, he can put it out there. And look, we'd be talking a whole lot about Kentron Portier, and we still will. I mean, if you were to just take a straw poll immediately after spring game, it would have been one of the more highly anticipated pieces on this offense and see what he turns into. In some ways, it may be the best thing that could happen for Portier to come back and be the, wide receiver number 1 in 24 and really have a feature year. But I still don't think this is a write-off by any means. What I'm really interested in, Bud, here is neither of us, we're not trying to play offense coordinator here, but when you sit here and you talk about the 2 wide receivers that we talked about, you talk about Kentron, talk about Deuce Spann, who's a nice wide receiver in his own right. Talk about the tight ends. Talk about the running backs. How much use is the slot going to get in this offense? That's what I'm really wondering. And how much do you maybe modify what you're doing if you don't feel like you have somebody out there that's going to, if you're not better used deployed using 2 backs in a set or 2 tight ends in a set or something like that. So I am I'm curious as to what that looks like, how much they lean on it, and if they are using the slot a whole lot, who that necessarily is. Because I don't think, I hate it for Winston Wright. I don't know that he's ready yet. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe catches for 67 and 72 yards against LSU will be all the proof in the world that I need to see that I'm wrong. But I do have some questions there as to what that position group looks like, how it's used, and how that may change some of the overall outlook as to what they do on offense.
Totally fair. I mean, look, the videos like from practice are out there from Florida State and all the media, and like they're pretty hawkish as far as what you can and can't put out. And so I don't think anybody out there is under any illusions that Winston Wright is back to what he was when you got him from West Virginia. And to recall, he was considered at the time the best receiver you had out of the portal, certainly the most proven when he came over from West Virginia. I mean, this was a guy who was an 88 target guy, caught the ball extremely well, also a valued asset in the return game.
House and kickoffs.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
dynamic athlete.
For sure. The car crash, which was not even his fault. It just sucks for the kid, man. Kid. I mean, he's certainly an adult now. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but you lose him. Well, not lose him, but like certainly, let's just kind of level set here. Like Winston Wright, there is some chance he gets back to what you need him to be at some point in this season. It would surprise me if that happens early in the season, but stranger things have certainly happened. Micah Pittman decided to take it on down the road to Utah. I think if that move had really bothered Florida State maybe could have done something about it. And I'm going to read into the fact that they didn't. Johnny Wilson last year took 28% of his snaps out of the slot, actually. Johnny, for how big of a guy he is someone who has worked hard to get off press. Relative to his size, Johnny getting off press, I would say, is not a strength of his. He actually has much better agility, like we talked about in his numbers earlier, relative to his size than you would expect. He's not necessarily the best guy off press, although he is improving. And that's certainly an area that I know opposing defensive coaches in the Pac-12, when he came from Arizona State, thought they could exploit. Like if you got up in his chest, they thought he didn't fight it off real well. Putting him in the slot does help him to get a more clean release oftentimes. Jaheim Bell last year, while he did take 73 carries for South Carolina, the majority of his snaps actually came not as an inline tight end. That was only 20%. 40% of Jaheim Bell's snaps were in the slot. So I'm not a math major, and I did go to Florida State, which is improving. Maybe they can join the AAU. But if you add together Jaheim Bell and Johnny Wilson's like slot percentage here, and this is definitely like not solid math, you're at 68. That's not terrible. We talked in the tight end preview how it just makes all the sense in the world to use Jaheim Bell as sort of a slot guy. South Carolina did it. I mean, it's just pretty clear that fits his skill set well. So, yeah, man, I don't know if you have a traditional slot on this team. And by traditional slot, I think we both mean what? Like shorter, shiftier, kind of like, compress space option route type guy.
Yeah, a 5'10" kid that can give interior defenders fits, trying to match up, and a guy that's finding holes within kind of that 8 to 15 yard bubble within kind of the mid layer of a defense. But yeah, that'll be interesting, man. Jaheim Bell, you probably see him line up 11 different places this year. I wonder if he's not somebody that you use in what we would look at traditionally as a slot. Or just the slot. I mean, you don't have to be 5'10" to run that. You bring up a good point about Johnny getting a cleaner release. Maybe if you put him there, I'm interested. Darian Williamson's certainly not a traditional slot wide receiver, but a guy that if he can stay healthy, I think the coaches will be kind of creative and trying to find ways to work him into what they're doing. You got 3 guys that are going to eat up. You got 2 guys that are going to eat up a hell of a lot of snaps and a hell of a lot of targets. Kentron is kind of right there in that, second layer. And then there's a whole lot of TBD when it comes to what the rest of this unit's going to look like. And somebody associated with the program today tell me that Deuce Spann had his best day of practice so far. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what that means. See if the light's starting to come on. Whole lot of talent. Whole lot of guys that are going to have to prove themselves and make the most out of, limited opportunities, at least from the initial, snaps. Now, this team may beat the hell out of a lot of teams, and some of these guys may get more snaps than they would have otherwise. But for that, snaps that matter most, it's going to be hard to push past those first 2 and particularly the first 3 that we talk about.
Completely agree. I'm glad you brought up Spann too, because I want to talk Spann and I want to talk Douglas just briefly. One thing that I do like about Mike, and maybe this was more just born out of necessity, right? But we would complain at times that Jimbo would not utilize a guy's special skill if he couldn't be adequate at all of the other things. We have definitely seen Mike say, hey, you know what? Your skill is your elusiveness. We're going to just put you in a role. It's not 60 snaps a game. It's 10 or 15. You can help this team run and decoy a couple times and you'll get the ball a couple times. Maybe that's lining you up in the backfield if you're Douglas and all of a sudden motion him out wide and you get the matchup you like and he goes. And we've seen that a couple times.
I think Ja'Kai Douglas is the perfect representation for this. Yeah.
And Spann, Spann's got a couple of end arounds before. They haven't always worked, but clearly Mike's kind of scheming and thinking. And how much of that
there's another wrinkle off of that. And I'm not saying for practice. I'm just saying from who the kid is and what he used to do.
No doubt.
That he has some different ability.
Now, how much of that was born out of necessity because the receiver room was really pretty bad 2 years ago and got better last year and was not amazing, but it was certainly extremely improved? And how much of that will still continue? How much of that do you need to do, right? If Coleman and Johnny Wilson are healthy, I think they're both 80 target guys. Probably. Maybe 75 on the low end if you're just killing teams and you're trying to keep these guys' legs fresh. But if that happens, that means you're probably also playing, 13. Well, 13 would be so 14 games. So I think if they both stay healthy, you're minimum 75 target guys. That's a lot. I'm curious to see how they do it, and I'm also really I want to see all day Dre Jacobs, right? Who's a dude who I know they definitely like, and that's just a Florida State camp find to a certain extent. The guy was very productive in high school against not very good competition at times. He always killed it in person at the Florida State camps. He did not dominate when he went to the elite camps. I'm not guessing on that. I was actually there. It's damn, I wish he would play here like he plays when he's in Tallahassee. And at the time, the quality of player that he was playing in Tallahassee in those camps was poor because Florida State was not doing a great job 2 years ago of getting really elite kids on campus like they do now. A lot, right? So he's come in and was very, very good in spring. And I mean, I could see him playing maybe some slot. That could make some sense, right? He's kind of shifty and I think he's probably an advanced route runner as a receiver. Are we missing anybody here that we can talk about?
No, I mean, Jacobs, I'm glad you brought him up. Again, only 3 practices. A guy that you couldn't watch more than 5 or 10 minutes of spring without jumping out at you immediately. Hakeem Williams, I will tell you while I was down there, he was walking out of practice. Mike ran by, threw an arm over the shoulder and said, that's the best 2 practices you've had since you've been here. You got to keep doing it. You got to keep working like that. So that is a guy that is supremely physically gifted, very raw, admittedly told you that I think he ran two routes in high school. Either the route where they threw it to me at the line of scrimmage and I just make everybody bounce off me, or the route where I just run by everybody and they throw me the ball. It's gonna get a little bit more complex at the college level, and Hakeem is catching on and has moments where you're like, "Ooh, yeah, that's what the high school ranking was about." But it's just gonna take some more time to probably shine that diamond to where it's reflective of the ranking. But no, Van Darius, or All Day Dre, maybe that's the guy. Again, I don't think he necessarily earns a ton of playing time before Clemson. I think you're going to kind of roll with what you have, but that's a guy by midway point could start to shake up the dynamics of some of the snap dynamics and target dynamics that we talked about 5 or 6 minutes ago. Absolutely.
So, kind of a weird thing here. Normally, like if you could play 12 personnel and feel really confident in it, I think it's certainly an advantage against some college defenses that are made to really play, to play more nickel. It's interesting. Your first two opponents are
Just for our casual listener, one back, two tight end.
Sorry, yes, 12 personnel, one back, two tight end, two receiver. Your first two big opponents both have like two studs at linebacker each. That's going to be a hell of a battle when you go to face LSU with Perkins and Spade. And obviously, I mean, Trotter at Clemson is really, really good, and they feel pretty good about that group apparently. So I am interested to see that. Like, if you could, would you want to spread those guys out a lot? I think the answer for Clemson is probably not, because I do think that a lot of those young DBs are going to grow up pretty well. And they had a lot of guys who were veterans who got hurt last year. I mean, if you think about it, they can play Barrett Carter all over the place. I mean, that's not really a guy you want to face in a super spread type thing. Nate Wiggins, Jalen Phillips, Mickens, Wiggins, Sheridan Jones, Toriano Pride's a sophomore there now. I mean, I'm not going to count Tyler Venables in that. TJ Dudley is obviously off the team. So, yeah, I maybe you would want to super spread out LSU in theory because of some of the defensive back problems they've been having, and maybe we'll save the rest of this for when we kind of run down some of the opponent stuff. I don't know. We're at like 28 minutes on the receiver. This is why we only did like 12 minutes on tight end, because we knew this was going to go long. This is a really, really fun group, man.
When you go to practice, this group and the offensive line jump out at you. Was it 2 years ago you were 14-14? Or was that 3 years ago?
Do you remember how much shit David Hale got for that? And he was totally right. Like, think about the guys you were happy about. We were hoping that Josh Burrell could make an impact as a freshman, maybe creatively, right? The kid they got from Kansas, Parchment.
I
mean, to no fault of his own, he caught 4th and 14, but still, like, Parchment would not play for this team.
No. Yeah. No, he would not. No, he would not. This is a have fun. Have fun watching this. Have fun watching what we are pretty confident in telling you what Keon Coleman's going to look like this year. And Johnny, already freak, only turned into more of one over the summer. Going to be a hell of a time watching this unit. This is going to be an awful lot of fun.